David Chen crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel for what felt like the 100th time that week, his flashlight cutting through the darkness ahead of him. The power grid on Outpost 7 had been acting up for months now, and today's blackout in Section C7 was just another problem to add to his growing list. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," he muttered to himself as he reached the junction box that controlled the lighting for the abandoned research wing. David had been working alone on this remote asteroid mining station for 3 years now, and talking to himself had become second nature. The other workers thought he was a bit odd, but David didn't mind the solitude. It gave him time to think and work at his own pace. The junction box opened with a rusty screech, revealing a mess of corroded wires and burnt circuits. David sighed and began pulling out his tools when something caught his eye tucked behind the main power coupling. There, wedged in a space barely large enough to fit them, were 3 oval objects that definitely didn't belong in an electrical panel. David carefully extracted the first object and held it up to his flashlight. It was about the size of a chicken egg, but felt much heavier, with a surface that seemed to be made of some kind of crystal or polished stone. The entire surface glowed with a soft, warm light that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. Even stranger, David could swear he heard a faint humming sound coming from within. "What in the world are you?" David whispered as he gently lifted out the other 2 objects. They were identical to the first, each one warm to the touch and pulsing with that same mysterious inner light. David had seen a lot of strange things working on various space installations over the years, but nothing quite like this. His first instinct was to report the find to Station Commander Ross, but something made him hesitate. The way the objects had been carefully hidden, almost protectively nestled behind the power coupling, suggested someone had put them there on purpose. David looked around the abandoned section. This wing had been sealed off after a hull breach 6 months ago, and nobody came here anymore. The eggs, because that's what David was starting to think they were, continued, their gentle humming and pulsing. As he held them, David felt an odd sense of responsibility wash over him. These weren't just random artifacts. They were alive, and they needed care. Against all protocol and common sense, David carefully wrapped the 3 eggs in his spare work shirt and made his way back to his quarters. His small living space wasn't much, just a bed, a desk, a tiny kitchen area, and a storage closet, but it was private. David cleared off his desk and created a makeshift nest using pillows and blankets, then placed the 3 eggs carefully in the center. Over the next several hours, David found himself checking on the eggs every few minutes. The pulsing seemed to have gotten a bit stronger since he'd moved them to the warmer environment of his quarters, and the humming had developed what almost sounded like different tones. From each egg, David tried to get some sleep, but his mind kept wandering to the mysterious objects on his desk. The next morning brought an answer that David never could have expected. The first egg had developed a small crack running along its surface, and as David watched in fascination, the crack slowly widened. A tiny claw pushed through the opening, followed by what looked like a miniature snout. "Holy space dust," David breathed as he watched the creature work its way out of the shell. What emerged was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. The creature was about the size of his fist, with scales that shifted color from deep blue to silver depending on how the light hit them. Its eyes were large and golden, filled with an intelligence that seemed far too advanced for something that had just hatched. The baby creature looked around David's quarters with curiosity rather than fear, its gaze finally settling on David himself. Their eyes met, and David felt something incredible happen. Suddenly he could sense the creature's emotions. A wave of contentment and safety washed over him, along with something that felt suspiciously like affection. "Well, hello there, little one," David said softly. The creature tilted its head at the sound of his voice, then let out a small chirping sound that somehow conveyed happiness. David couldn't explain how he knew what the creature was feeling, but the connection was unmistakable. Over the next 2 days, the other 2 eggs hatched in similar fashion. Each baby creature was slightly different. One had scales that shimmered between green and gold, while the third displayed patterns of deep purple and silver. But all 3 shared the same intelligent golden eyes and that mysterious ability to communicate their emotions directly to David. David found himself naming them based on his profession. The first to hatch with blue-silver scales became Spark. The green-gold one he called Volt, and the purple-silver one became Circuit. The names seemed to please them, as David could sense their approval each time he used them. The babies grew remarkably, fast within a week. They had doubled in size and were already showing incredible abilities. David watched in amazement as Spark walked straight through the solid wall of his quarters to explore the corridor outside. Volt seemed able to generate small electrical charges that made David's hair stand on end, while Circuit could somehow make objects levitate just by looking at them. But it was their intelligence that truly amazed David. They seemed to understand everything he said to them, and their emotional communication became more sophisticated each day. David began to pick up actual thoughts from them. Simple concepts at first, but growing more complex. It was during the second week that David learned something that made his blood run cold. While playing with Circuit, the little creature's thoughts suddenly filled with images, vast star-filled voids, massive ships with wings like metal dragons, and a figure of terrifying power sitting on a throne made of what looked like crystallized starlight. The images came with emotions too: fear, loss, and an overwhelming sense of abandonment. Circuit and his siblings weren't just unusual alien creatures. They were the children of someone incredibly powerful and incredibly dangerous. The images Circuit shared showed their parent as a being of immense size and terrible beauty, with scales like black diamonds and eyes that held the cold fire of dying stars. "Your father is looking for you, isn't he?" David whispered to the three babies. They huddled closer to him, their emotions radiating a mixture of love for David and terror at the thought of their biological parent. Finding them meant safety and warmth, and the gentle human who talked to them while he worked. Being found by their father meant something else entirely. David had always considered himself a simple man with a simple job, but as he looked at the three incredible creatures who had adopted him as their parent, he realized his life was about to become anything but simple. The babies trusted him completely, and that trust came with a responsibility he never asked for, but couldn't bring himself to abandon. "Don't worry," he told them, gathering all three into his arms. "We'll figure this out together." The babies purred with contentment, their scales shimmering as they settled against him. David stared out the small porthole at the stars beyond, wondering what was coming their way and hoping he would be strong enough to protect the three miraculous creatures who had chosen to love him. Across the galaxy, Emperor Drakmor stood motionless on the observation deck of his flagship, watching another world burn beneath him. The planet had harbored rebels who dared to oppose his empire, but more importantly, they had claimed to know nothing about his missing offspring. Every world that denied him brought his rage to new heights. The Emperor was a creature of legend and nightmare, standing 12 feet tall with scales that absorbed light like black holes. His wings, when fully extended, could span the width of a small building, and his eyes held the accumulated fury of someone who had conquered 1,000 worlds. Only one thing had ever mattered more to him than power, and that was his mate and their three unborn children. The memory of that terrible day 6 months ago still burned in his mind. The rebel attack on his palace had been unexpected and vicious. His beloved mate had died defending their eggs, and in the chaos that followed, the eggs had vanished. Drakmor had torn apart the palace stone by stone looking for them, had interrogated every survivor, had followed every lead across half the galaxy, but still his children remained lost. "My Emperor," General Corvin approached carefully, his own dragon-like features tense with barely concealed fear. "The search fleets have completed their sweep of the Centauri sector. No signs of the royal offspring have been detected." Drakmor turned, his terrible gaze on his general, and Corvin involuntarily stepped back. The Emperor's voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of crushing gravity. "Then we expand the search. The outer rim territories, the neutral zones, the human colonies, everywhere." His claws scored deep gouges in the metal railing. "Someone somewhere knows where my children are, and they will tell me before I burn their world to ash." Meanwhile, back on Outpost 7, David was discovering just how remarkable his three adopted children truly were. Spark had grown to the size of a house cat, and could now phase through any solid matter at will. Volt could generate electromagnetic pulses strong enough to restart dead machinery, and Circuit seemed able to manipulate gravity itself on a small scale. David had started taking them with him on his maintenance rounds, unable to bear leaving them alone in his quarters. The babies were endlessly curious about his work, and their unique abilities actually made many repairs easier. Spark could phase inside sealed components to fix internal problems, while Volt could test circuits simply by touching them. "You three are quite the team," David said, as he watched Circuit levitate a heavy power coupling while he worked on the connections beneath it. The baby dragon chirped happily at the praise. Its scales shimmering with pleasure, David had become quite good at reading their emotional communications, and he was constantly amazed by their intelligence and capacity for affection. The babies had also begun sharing more detailed memories with him, though David wasn't sure he wanted to see all of what they showed him. Their father's empire was vast and built on conquest and fear. Entire species served him not out of loyalty, but because the alternative was extinction. Yet in the memories the babies shared of their early development inside the eggs, David caught glimpses of a different side of their father, moments of gentleness and what might have been love. "He misses you," David said one evening, as the three babies settled into their nest for sleep. "I can see it in the memories you share. Your father loves you, even if he has a terrible way of showing it to everyone else." Circuit, who seemed to be the most empathically sensitive of the three, projected a complex mix of emotions: love for their biological father mixed with terror of his power, and an overwhelming preference for David's gentle care. The baby dragon snuggled closer to David, and he felt its contentment wash over him like a warm blanket. It was Volt who first detected the approaching ships. The baby dragon had been playing with the station's communication array, his electromagnetic abilities allowing him to boost the signal range far beyond normal parameters. Suddenly, Volt's emotions shifted to alarm, and David felt the baby's distress like a punch to his stomach. "What is it, little one?" David asked. But Volt was already projecting images directly into his mind. Dozens of ships, massive and dark, moving through space with deadly purpose. The ships were still days away, but they were clearly heading for this sector of space. David's blood ran cold as he recognized the design of the vessels from the memories his babies had shared. These were ships of the Dragon Empire, and that meant only one thing. Their father had found their trail somehow that night. David barely slept. Instead, he held all three babies close and tried to think of options. None of them were good. If he tried to run with the babies, where could they go? Emperor Drakmor controlled half the galaxy, and his reach extended into the other half. If David stayed and tried to hide the babies, how long before they were discovered? And what would happen to him when they were? The next day brought confirmation of David's worst fears. The station's long-range sensors detected the approaching fleet, and Commander Ross immediately put the outpost on high alert. The approaching ships hadn't responded to any communication attempts, but their course was unmistakably aimed at Outpost 7. "All non-essential personnel are to report to the evacuation shuttles," Ross announced over the station's communication system. "This is not a drill. We have an unidentified fleet approaching, and we're not taking any chances." David knew he should follow orders, should gather his few belongings and board one of the shuttles. But he couldn't bring himself to leave the babies, and he couldn't take them with him either. The shuttles would be cramped and filled with people, and there would be no way to hide three rapidly growing dragon babies. Instead, David made perhaps the most foolish and brave decision of his life. He took the babies to the most secure part of the station, the central power core chamber. It was heavily shielded and had multiple backup systems, and if things went badly, at least they would face whatever came together. The babies seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Their usual playful chatter had quieted, and they stayed close to David, their scales dimmed with worry. Spark kept phasing in and out of visibility. A nervous habit he had developed. Volt's electromagnetic field fluctuated wildly, causing nearby electronics to flicker. Circuit floated small objects around them in complex patterns, as if trying to create some kind of protective barrier. "I want you three to know something," David said as he settled into the power core chamber with his adopted children. Whatever happens when your father gets here, you are the best things that ever happened to me. I love you, and I'm proud to be your parent even if it's only been for a few weeks. The babies pressed against him, their emotional projection so strong that David felt tears in his eyes. Their love for him was absolute and unwavering, completely uncomplicated by questions of biology or species. They had chosen him as their parent, and that choice meant everything outside the station. The Dragon fleet had arrived. General Corvin's advance ships surrounded Outpost 7 like predators circling wounded prey. The general himself boarded the station with a squad of elite Dragon warriors, their presence causing the station's remaining crew to cower in terror. "I seek the stolen offspring of Emperor Drakmor," Corvin announced to Commander Ross. "Surrender them immediately and your deaths will be quick." Ross, to his credit, tried to maintain some dignity even as he shook with fear. "There are no dragon offspring on this station. This is a simple mining outpost. We have nothing you could possibly want." Corvin's laugh was like the sound of tearing metal. "My sensors detect the psychic signature of royal hatchlings aboard this station. Do not lie to me, human. Your cooperation now might save some of your people." In the power core chamber, David felt the babies' terror spike as they sensed their biological father's forces searching the station circuit, projected an image of the Dragon warriors moving through the corridors, their powerful senses tracking the baby's unique energy signatures. "They're going to find us," David whispered, holding his 3 children closer. "But whatever happens, remember that you are loved, you are wanted, and you have nothing to be ashamed of." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors outside the power core chamber. David could hear the distinctive scrape of claws on metal, and he knew their time had run out. The hunt was over, and soon he would face the consequences of becoming a parent to the children of the galaxy's most feared ruler. The babies huddled against him, their scales now glowing with a soft, defiant light. They might be afraid, but they had made their choice. David was their father now, and they would stand with him against whatever came next. The power core chamber's heavy doors burst open with a sound like thunder, and General Corvin strode in with his squad of Dragon warriors behind him. The general was an imposing figure, nearly 10 feet tall, with scales that gleamed like polished bronze, but even he seemed small compared to the massive presence that David could sense approaching the station. "Found them," Corvin growled, his golden eyes fixed on the 3 baby dragons who immediately moved to shield David with their small bodies, the royal offspring, alive and well. His gaze shifted to David, and there was death in those ancient eyes, and their kidnapper. David stood slowly, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "I didn't kidnap anyone," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I found 3 eggs abandoned in a maintenance tunnel. I've been taking care of them." "Taking care of them?" Corvin's voice dripped with contempt. "You have corrupted the minds of the Emperor's heirs, filled them with weakness and attachment to a lesser species." He gestured to his warriors. "Seize the human, prepare him for execution." But as the Dragon warriors stepped forward, something unexpected happened. Spark, despite being barely the size of a small dog, moved directly into their path. His scales blazed with defiant light, and his young voice projected pure determination into everyone's minds. "No hurt, Papa David?" The baby dragon's thought voice was clear and strong. "David is good. Papa David loves us." Volt and Circuit immediately flanked their brother, their own, small forms radiating protective energy. Circuit lifted several heavy pieces of equipment and held them suspended in the air like weapons, while Volt generated an electromagnetic field that made the Dragon warriors' armor spark and hiss. The warriors hesitated, clearly unwilling to harm the royal offspring, even to reach David General. Corvin snarled in frustration, but before he could give new orders, a communication signal crackled through the station systems. "General Corvin." The voice that came through the speakers was like the rumble of distant thunder, carrying authority that made everyone in the chamber instinctively lower their heads. "Bring me the human unharmed. I would speak with the creature who dares claim my children." David felt his knees go weak, Emperor Drakmor himself was here, and he wanted to meet face to face. The babies pressed closer to him, their emotions projecting both terror and fierce protectiveness. They were afraid of their biological father, but they were more afraid of what he might do to David. "You heard the Emperor," Corvin said, but his tone had changed from contempt to something like respect. "You will come with us now." The journey through the station felt like a march to execution. David walked surrounded by dragon warriors, while his 3 adopted children floated alongside, him using their various abilities. Spark phased in and out of solid matter nervously. Volt generated small lightning displays, and Circuit kept a constant rotation of small objects orbiting around them like a protective barrier. They emerged into the station's main cargo bay, which had been cleared to accommodate a visitor of extraordinary size. Emperor Drakmor stood in the center of the vast space, and David's first sight of him was like looking into the face of a living nightmare. The Emperor was even larger than David had imagined from the baby's memories. Easily 15 feet tall with wings that scraped the cargo bay's ceiling, his scales were not quite black but rather the deep color of space itself, seeming to absorb light and reflect nothing back. His eyes were like dying stars, ancient and terrible, holding the weight of countless conquered worlds. But as David looked closer, he saw something else in those terrible eyes. Pain. The kind of deep, soul-crushing grief that comes from losing everything that matters. Emperor Drakmor was not just a conqueror. He was a father who had lost his children and his mate in a single terrible day. "So," Drakmor's voice was like an earthquake-given sound, "you are the creature who stole my offspring." His gaze shifted to the 3 babies, who had moved to form, a protective line between David and their biological father, and corrupted their minds against their own blood. David took a deep breath, knowing that his next words might be his last. "With respect, Your Majesty, I didn't steal anyone. I found 3 eggs abandoned and alone, and I cared for them the best I could. When they hatched, they chose me as their parent. I didn't force that choice." Drakmor's eyes flared with fury. "Chose you? You dare suggest that the heirs to my empire would choose a weak, short-lived creature over their own father? You have clearly used some form of mind control or—" "Papa David, no mind control," Spark interrupted, his young voice cutting through his father's rage. "Papa David give love, Papa David give safe, Papa David give hugs." The Emperor stared at his son, clearly stunned to hear the baby dragon defend a human. The other 2 babies added their own voices to the protest, their emotional projections filling the cargo bay with feelings of safety, contentment, and absolute trust in David. "They were alone, and afraid when I found them," David said quietly. "All I did was give them a warm place to sleep and make sure they had enough to eat. They grew attached because I was there when they needed someone. That's how children work, isn't it? They love whoever takes care of them." Drakmor's massive head tilted slightly, and for a moment David caught a glimpse of something other than rage in those ancient eyes. "You speak of love as if you understand what it means to lose everything you care about." "I know what it means to find something worth protecting," David replied. "These 3 babies trusted me, and I won't let anyone hurt them, not even their biological father if that's what it takes." The cargo bay fell silent except for the soft humming of the station's life support systems. David could feel the tension radiating from everyone present. The dragon warriors ready for violence, General Corvin waiting for orders, and the 3 babies caught between their love for David and their complex feelings about their father. Emperor Drakmor studied David for a long moment, his terrible gaze seeming to peer into the human's very soul. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality. Not the fury of a conqueror, but the weariness of a father who had lost too much. "You would challenge me for my own children? A fragile creature who lives barely a century would stand against one who has ruled for 10,000 years. David straightened his shoulders, drawing strength from the baby's unwavering support. "I would do anything to protect them. That's what parents do, isn't it?" Something shifted in Drakmor's expression. The rage was still there, but it was now mixed with something that might have been curiosity or even respect. "Very well, little human, I propose a test. Not of strength, for you would perish in moments, but of worthiness. If you can prove to me that you deserve the love my children have given you, then perhaps we can reach an understanding. And if I can't prove it? David asked. Drakmore's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. Then you will die, and my children will learn that attachments to lesser beings only lead to pain and loss. The three babies immediately protested, their voices joining in a chorus of distress and anger. They pressed closer to David, their scales blazing with protective light. Circuit lifted half the cargo bay's equipment into the air. While Spark began phasing rapidly between solid and ethereal states, Volt generated an electromagnetic field so powerful that sparks flew from nearby control panels. "We no let Father hurt Papa David," Spark declared, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "Papa David is good father. Papa David choose us when no one else choose us." Emperor Drakmore stared at his children in amazement. David could see the war taking place behind those ancient eyes, the fury of a ruler who had been defied, battling against the wonder of a father seeing his children display courage and loyalty. "They defend you," Drakmore said quietly. "My offspring, the heirs to an empire, would stand against their own blood to protect a human." He was quiet for another long moment. Then his voice grew stronger. "Very well, the test will proceed, but with new conditions. If you fail, I will not harm you. I will simply take my children and leave. You will live with the knowledge that you were not worthy of their love." David felt the baby's relief wash over him, mixed with continued anxiety about what the test might involve. "What kind of test?" he asked. Drakmore's smile became something almost like approval. "The test of a true parent. 3 challenges, each designed to reveal whether your care for my children is genuine or merely the selfish attachment of a lesser being." The Emperor's wings spread slightly, casting shadows across the cargo bay. "Succeed and I will acknowledge your bond with my offspring. Fail, and they return to their proper place in my empire." David looked at his 3 adopted children, drawing strength from their unwavering faith. In him, whatever Drakmore had planned, whatever tests lay ahead, he would face them. He had already made his choice the moment he decided to care for 3 mysterious eggs found in a maintenance tunnel. "I accept your challenge," David said. The game of parenthood was about to begin. The testing chamber that Emperor Drakmore created was unlike anything David had ever seen. With a gesture of his massive claws, the dragon ruler had transformed the cargo bay into something that resembled a courtroom crossed with an arena. The walls now displayed swirling images of distant galaxies, and the floor had become a circle of polished black stone that reflected the stars above. "The first test," Drakmore announced, his voice echoing through the transformed space, "concerns sacrifice." With another gesture, a pedestal rose from the floor, and on it appeared a device that looked like it was made of crystallized light. "This contains the location of every human colony in known space. Touch it, and you will possess wealth beyond imagination, power over star systems, technology that could extend your brief life for millennia. All I ask in return is that you walk away from my children and never contact them again." David stared at the glowing device, feeling its pull. The promise of power and longevity was tempting, especially for someone who had spent his life doing simple repair work on forgotten mining stations. But as he looked at Spark, Volt and Circuit, who were watching him with complete trust in their golden eyes, the choice became clear. "No," David said simply, not even reaching toward the pedestal. "They're not mine to trade away, and I'm not for sale." Drakmore's expression showed the first hint of surprise. "You refuse without even considering the offer? The power I offer could benefit your entire species. My species doesn't need power gained by abandoning children," David replied. "And these 3 trust me to be better than that." He knelt down as the babies rushed to him, their emotional projections radiating approval and relief. Some things matter more than personal gain. The pedestal and its tempting device vanished, and Drakmore nodded slowly. "The first test is passed. The second test concerns wisdom." The chamber around them shifted again, and suddenly David found himself looking at a horrifying vision of the future in the swirling images that surrounded them. David saw Spark, Volt, and Circuit as adults, their forms magnificent and terrible, They had grown to rival their father in size and power, but in this vision, they used their abilities to conquer and destroy worlds. David watched in horror as Future Spark incinerated a planet's surface, while Future Volt tore apart space stations with electromagnetic storms. Future Circuit crushed entire fleets by manipulating gravity itself. "This is their heritage," Drakmor said, his voice carrying centuries of grim satisfaction. "This is what they are bred for. Power without restraint, conquest without mercy. They are dragons, and dragons rule through strength. If you truly care for them, how would you handle their true nature when it emerges?" David felt sick as he watched the visions of destruction, but he forced himself to really think about the question. The babies pressed against him, their own emotions confused and frightened by seeing these possible futures of themselves. "I would teach them about consequences," David said slowly. "Every choice has a price, and hurting others always hurts yourself in the end. I would show them that real strength comes from protection, not destruction." He looked directly at Drakmor. "I would help them find better ways to use their power, and if they chose the wrong path anyway, I would never stop trying to guide them back. Even if it meant standing against them, even if they became your enemies." David's heart ached at the thought, but his answer came without hesitation. A real parent doesn't abandon their children when things get difficult. You keep loving them, keep believing they can be better, and keep trying to help them find their way. That's what love means. It doesn't have conditions. The terrible visions faded, and Drakmor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice held something that might have been respect. "The second test is passed, but the third test is the hardest of all, little human, because it asks you to choose between the children you claim to love and the species you belong to." The chamber transformed once more, and David found himself looking at Earth itself. The blue-green world hung in the star field around them, beautiful and fragile. Drakmor's massive form loomed over the image, his claws extended toward David's home planet. "I could destroy your world with a thought," the Emperor said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Every human who has ever lived could be ash in moments. I offer you this choice. Give me my children, willingly, acknowledge that they belong with their own kind, and I will spare your species. Refuse and Earth burns." David felt the babies' distress spike as they understood what their father was proposing. Spark began phasing frantically. Volt's electromagnetic field fluctuated wildly, and Circuit accidentally crushed several pieces of debris with gravitational pulses. The thought of their biological father destroying David's entire world because of them was clearly tearing them apart, but David surprised everyone, including himself, by laughing, not with humor, but with the sound of someone who had finally understood something important. "You're testing the wrong person, Your Majesty." Drakmor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Explain yourself." David gestured to the three babies who were now huddled together, in distress. "Look at them. They're terrified that you might hurt innocent people because of them. That tells you everything you need to know about what kind of adults they'll become." He stood up, facing the massive dragon ruler without flinching. "You want to know if I'm worthy of their love? The real question is whether you're worthy of being their father." The cargo bay fell into stunned silence. General Corvin and his warriors looked ready to attack David for his insolence, but Drakmor held up one massive claw to stop them. His ancient eyes studied David with new intensity. "You dare judge me?" Drakmor asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I dare love them without conditions," David replied. "These babies chose me because I never made them afraid. They feel safe with me, happy with me, free to be themselves without worrying that I might hurt others if they displease me." He looked at the image of Earth still hanging in the starfield. "Go ahead and destroy my world if that's what you think parenthood means, but know that if you do, your children will never trust you. They'll spend their lives afraid of making you angry, afraid of disappointing you, afraid of loving anyone else because you might take them away too." Spark stepped forward then, his young voice projecting clearly to everyone in the chamber. "Papa David, right?" the baby dragon said, his emotional projection filled with sad wisdom. "We love Father who made us, but we fear Father who made us. Papa David, never make us fear. Papa David, teach us fear is bad teacher." Volt added his own voice to his brothers. Papa David show us love is better than fear. Love make us want to be good, fear make us want to hide. Circuit, the most empathically sensitive of the three, projected a complex emotional message that encompassed everything they had learned from David, that strength should protect the weak, that power should be used carefully, that love should never come. With threats, Emperor Drakmor stared at his children for a long moment, and David could see something cracking in the ancient dragon's expression. The terrible certainty that had driven him for millennia was wavering as he confronted the simple truth his children had spoken. "They are not afraid of you," Drakmor said, quietly, looking at David with something like wonder. "In all my existence, every being I have encountered has shown fear in my presence. But they approach you with joy. They speak to you without measuring their words. They trust you completely." The image of Earth faded from the starfield, and the testing chamber began to dissolve back into the familiar cargo bay. When the transformation was complete, Drakmor seemed somehow smaller, less overwhelming. The rage that had defined him for so long was still there, but it was tempered, now by something else: understanding. "I have spent 6 months searching for my children," the Emperor said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I told myself it was love that drove me, but now I see it was grief and rage. I wanted them back not for their sake, but for mine. I wanted to fill the hole in my heart, left by their mother's death." David felt a surge of sympathy for the massive creature who had lost so much. "Grief makes us do things that don't make sense," he said gently. "But love means putting their needs first, even when it hurts." Drakmor looked at his 3 children, who were still clustered protectively around David. "They have found something with you that I could never give them," he admitted. "Peace, safety, the freedom to grow without the weight of an empire on their shoulders." His ancient eyes met David's. "But they are still my blood, my legacy. What would you have me do?" David took a deep breath, knowing that his answer would shape not just his future, but the future of 3 remarkable children, who deserved better than to be caught between worlds. "Share them with me," he said. "Let them choose where they want to be when they want to be there. Let them have 2 fathers instead of forcing them to lose one." The suggestion clearly surprised Drakmor, but before he could respond, Spark projected a burst of pure joy that filled everyone's mind. "2 papas," the baby dragon said, his scales shimmering with happiness. "Father who made us and Papa who found us, both love us, both keep us safe." Volt and Circuit immediately added their approval, their emotional projections painting pictures of a future where they could explore their heritage with Drakmor while still maintaining their loving bond with David. It was an impossible dream that might just be possible after all. Emperor Drakmor was quiet for a long time, his massive form casting shadows across the cargo bay. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new quality, not the commanding tone of a conqueror, but the uncertain words of a father learning to love differently. "I do not know how to be gentle," he said. "I do not know how to love without possessing. I have ruled through fear for so long that I have forgotten any other way." "Then learn," David said simply. "They'll teach you if you let them. Children are good at that." The beginning of a new kind of family was taking shape in the most unlikely of places. 5 years had passed since the day Emperor Drakmor learned that love and fear could not coexist in the same heart, and the changes across the galaxy were nothing short of revolutionary. David stood on the observation deck of the Dragon Imperial flagship, watching Spark practice diplomatic negotiations with a delegation from the crystalline hegemony. The young dragon, now the size of a small spacecraft, moved with grace and patience as he helped resolve a territorial dispute that had threatened to spark another interstellar war. "Your son has quite a gift for finding peaceful solutions," Admiral Chen remarked, joining David at the viewport. The former mining station electrician still found it strange to be addressed with such respect by high-ranking military officers from multiple species, but his role as the Dragon Father had earned him recognition throughout known space. "He gets that from his biological father, actually," David replied, watching Spark's scales shimmer with satisfaction as the negotiating parties reached an agreement. Drakmor always had the intelligence to find better solutions. He just needed to learn that destroying your enemies isn't always the best option. The transformation of the Dragon Empire had been gradual but profound. Instead of ruling through conquest and fear, Drakmor had slowly shifted toward what he called protective dominion. Worlds that joined the Empire now did so voluntarily, drawn by offers of technological advancement, trade opportunities, and protection from genuine threats. The Emperor still commanded respect throughout the galaxy, but it was a respect born of admiration rather than terror. Papa David. Circuit's voice echoed in David's mind as the youngest of his 3 children teleported onto the observation deck, using gravitational manipulation. The dragon had grown into a magnificent creature with scales that shifted between deep purple and silver depending on the light. Father Drakmor wants to see you in the strategy chamber. We've received another distress call. David smiled at the casual way Circuit referred to his biological father. These days, the 3 young dragons moved easily between their 2 parents, spending time with Drakmor to learn about their heritage and responsibilities, while returning to David for the emotional support and unconditional love that had shaped their early development. The arrangement had worked better than anyone had dared hope. The strategy chamber had once been a place where Drakmor planned military campaigns against rebellious worlds. Now it served as a coordination center for rescue operations and humanitarian missions. The Emperor stood at the central holographic display, his massive form somehow less intimidating than it had been years ago. Perhaps it was the way he moved more carefully around the smaller beings who now served as his advisors, or the way his voice carried patience instead of barely restrained fury. "Ah, David," Drakmor rumbled as the human entered the chamber. "We have received a transmission from the Outer Rim. A human colony ship has suffered catastrophic engine failure and is drifting toward a black hole. The nearest Imperial fleet is 3 days away, but Volt could get there in 6 hours using his electromagnetic drive capabilities," David finished, immediately understanding the situation. "Where is he?" "Present and accounted for, Papa David." Volt materialized through the chamber wall, his green-gold scales crackling with barely contained energy. The middle child had grown into the most physically powerful of the 3, able to travel vast distances by riding electromagnetic currents through space. "I can reach the colony ship, but I'll need help with the actual rescue. The ship is too large for me to tow alone." "I'll go with you," Spark announced, flowing into the chamber with the fluid grace he'd inherited from his father. "Between your electromagnetic manipulation and my phasing abilities, we should be able to repair their engines from the inside." David felt a familiar surge of pride mixed with worry. His 3 children were now capable of incredible feats, but they were still young and sometimes overconfident. Still, they had proven themselves time and again over the past few years, earning reputations as heroes throughout the galaxy. "Take a support fleet," Drakmor suggested, his tone carrying the careful balance he'd learned between offering guidance and allowing independence. "Not because you cannot handle the mission, but because the colonists will need medical aid and temporary shelter." "Already being prepared," Circuit added, manipulating several holographic displays simultaneously. "I've calculated the optimal approach vector and identified the specific engine components most likely to need replacement. We should be able to complete the rescue within 12 hours, David." Watched the interaction between his children and their biological father with deep satisfaction. The formal respect was still there, but it was now tempered with genuine affection. Drakmor had learned to express love through support and trust rather than possessive control, while the children had come to appreciate their heritage without being crushed by its weight. "There's something else," Drakmor said as the 3 young dragons prepared to depart. The colony ship's distress call mentioned that they were carrying refugees from the Andromedan sector survivors from worlds that were destroyed during my expansion campaigns. The Emperor's voice carried the weight of old guilt. "They may not welcome rescue from Imperial forces." Spark tilted his massive head thoughtfully. "Then we don't approach as Imperial forces," he said. "We approach as the Dragonfather's children, offering help because it's the right thing to do. Once they're safe, they can decide for themselves what they think of the Empire." The wisdom in his eldest child's words brought a small smile to Drakmor's features. It was exactly the kind of solution that David would have suggested, showing how thoroughly the human's influence had shaped the young dragon's thinking. After the three children departed on their rescue mission, David found himself alone with Drakmor in the strategy chamber. It was a rare occurrence these days, as both of them were usually busy with their respective responsibilities. The Emperor had his reformed empire to manage, while David had become something like a galactic counselor helping to mediate disputes and advise on humanitarian missions. "Do you ever regret it?" Drakmor asked suddenly. "The path we chose, I know that sharing custody of the children has complicated your life considerably. You could have had a simple existence on that mining station." David considered the question seriously. He thought about the quiet life he'd left behind, the simple routine of electrical repairs and maintenance work. There had been a peaceful predictability to that existence that was certainly missing from his current role as the Dragon Father. "I regret that it took a crisis for us to find this solution," David said finally. "I regret the years of fear and conquest that came before. But regret raising those three incredible children? Never. They've taught me more about love and courage than I ever knew was possible." Drakmor nodded slowly. "They have taught me as well. I spent millennia believing that strength meant the ability to take what I wanted. Now I understand that true strength lies in knowing when not to use power, when to let others choose their own path." A communication alert interrupted their conversation, and Volt's voice filled the chamber with excitement. "Papa David, Father Drakmor, you need to see this. The colony ship wasn't just carrying refugees. They have children with them. Orphans from the destroyed worlds. And some of them—" His voice carried amazement. "Some of them are showing signs of developing psychic abilities, like ours." David and Drakmor exchanged glances. The implications were staggering. If other species were developing abilities similar to those of the dragon children, it could mean the beginning of a new era of galactic evolution. "Bring them home," David said without hesitation. "All of them, the children who need families, the adults who need a fresh start, everyone. The Imperial adoption protocols will need to be expanded," Drakmor added, his tactical mind already working on the logistics. "We'll need to establish new training programs, educational facilities, support networks." He paused, then continued with something like wonder. "We may be looking at the foundation of a truly integrated galactic community." Over the following months, the rescue of the colony ship proved to be just the beginning. Refugees and orphans from across the galaxy began making their way to Dragon Empire worlds, drawn by stories of the reformed empire and its unusual ruling family. David found himself busier than ever, helping to establish adoption programs and educational systems that could accommodate children from dozens of different species. The three dragon children threw themselves into the work with characteristic enthusiasm. Spark became the unofficial ambassador to new arrivals, using his diplomatic skills to help refugees feel welcome. Volt used his technical abilities to improve living conditions on resettlement worlds, while Circuit worked with the younger children, teaching them to control their developing abilities. "You know," David said one evening as he watched Circuit helping a young crystalline child learn to manipulate light patterns, "I think your father was right about one thing. We really are looking at a new kind of galactic community." Circuit's scales shimmered with contentment as he projected his emotions to David. "Better than the old way," the young dragon agreed. "Love makes everything grow stronger. Fear just makes things break." That night, David received an emergency transmission on a frequency he hadn't heard from in years. It was from Outpost 7, the mining station where his adventure had begun. The current chief electrician, a woman named Rodriguez, appeared on the holographic display looking both embarrassed and desperate. "Dragonfather David," she said, using his official title with obvious discomfort. "I'm sorry to bother you with something so small, but we've got a situation here. Our power grid has been acting up, and today we found something strange tucked behind one of the main coupling arrays. 3 eggs about the size of chicken eggs, glowing with some kind of internal light." David felt his heart skip a beat as Circuit's emotional projection spiked. With excitement and recognition, the young dragon had been monitoring the transmission and was now practically vibrating with anticipation. "We didn't know what to do with them," Rodriguez continued. Command wants us to turn them over to the xenobiology department, but something about that doesn't feel right. They seem like they need care, not study. I know it's probably beneath your notice now, but you're the only person I could think of who might understand. David was already moving toward his personal shuttle before Rodriguez finished speaking. Pack them carefully and keep them warm, he instructed. I'll be there as soon as possible. And Rodriguez? You did the right thing calling me. As David prepared to return to where his journey as a father had begun, he felt Circuit settle beside him in the shuttle. The young dragon's emotional projection was filled with excitement and curiosity about these new potential siblings. 3 more eggs, Circuit mused. I wonder what species they are this time. David smiled as he set course for the asteroid belt. Does it matter? Children need love no matter what species they are, and we seem to be pretty good at providing that. The shuttle jumped to hyperspace, carrying the dragon father toward another group of abandoned children who needed a family. The galaxy had become a very different place over the past 5 years, shaped by the simple idea that love could triumph over fear, and that families could be built from choice rather than just biology. Behind them, Emperor Drakmor watched the shuttle depart and allowed himself a rare smile. His children were going to be big brothers again, and the galaxy was about to get a little bit brighter. The reign of the cruel dragon emperor was truly over. The age of the protective father had begun, and it was spreading one rescued child at a time.